Welcome to the Political Philosophy Podcast. I'm Toby Buckle. In my interview on Rawls and the populist right with Nuti and Badano, I made a point in passing that when it comes to people's reaction to the far right, the populist right, to Trump, some people are incredibly alarmed by it, and some people kind of want to dance around it. They don't agree with it by any means, but maybe, we need to focus on this other thing, or, And I made the point that I think that at its core, that isn't some rational, argumentative, philosophical, reasons-based thing. I think at just some intuitive level, the danger of the far right either clicks for people or it doesn't. And that's a thought that's been bouncing around my head for a while now. It's speculative and it's anecdotal, and I fully own both of those things about it. But it's not coming from nowhere. It's coming from so many hours of conversations about these topics, and of both having back and forth with people, but also just sort of thinking and reflecting back on those conversations and why they went the way that they went. Both on the podcast, which have been very interesting and informative, but also just in real life. I say as if the podcast is existing in some sort of illusory universe of forms. But anyway, this is not an episode about here are 10 reasons why Trump really is quite dangerous and means what he says. This is an episode on why some people think that, and some people, while not being Trump supporters, perhaps just don't take it as seriously. I won't give it any more preamble than that. It's a reasonably long audio essay, so thank you in advance for hearing me out on this one. This one is quite original to me. These are just my thoughts, but like I say, they are ones that I've been mulling around and trying out on people for quite some time now. So yeah, let me know what you think. I would appreciate feedback on this one, including critical feedback. The only other thing I'll add is, if you like the podcast, please do consider supporting on Patreon. I don't do any advertisement on this show. The audio essay you're going to listen to is not going to be interrupted by me trying to sell you a VPN or whatever it is. All of the costs associated with this show are covered by listeners, so if you think this audio essay or one of my interviews is worth a couple of bucks, it'd be great to have them. Please do chip them in, and thank you so much to everyone who does. Apologies if I've got just recovered from a cold doing this and recording this one, so I think I sound all right, but apologies if I'm a little hoarse at points. Okay, let's get straight to it. This is Trump, Gender, and Getting It. Having hosted a politics podcast in the age of Donald Trump, I've had a lot of conversations with people who have concerns about politics and political discourse that, while not all exactly the same, have a similar sort of tone and tenor to them. They're all of the same, flavour of thing. These are concerns about increasing partisanship, increasing acrimony in politics, hostility in politics, lack of civility in politics, an increasing view of the other side as the enemy, as someone who's not a legitimate part of the political system, an increasing lack of trust both in institutions, but also just in each other. a lack of trust that the other side can be trusted to govern responsibly or even safely, a lack of trust that we can lose an election and still survive as the sort of country that we've always been. Now, these concerns are not coming from nowhere, right? There is a great deal of empirical evidence that trust is at an all-time low and polarisation is at an all-time high, or at least all-time relative to sort of modern politics and the time that we've taken opinion surveys. It's not wild to be concerned about these things. Nevertheless, I've tended to have a scepticism about this sort of a political analysis and this sort of political project. And that scepticism has remained, even through reading dozens of books on this and doing so with a view to really understanding the arguments and, like I say, having sustained really great, really engaged conversations with many of the authors of those books. Nonetheless, I find, and this is to sum up a whole bunch of things into one point that is, of course, not going to do justice to all of it, but I find people concerned by this often want what I think in my head as the thing. Capital T, declarative, the thing. What do I mean by the thing? They want a politics that's more civil. They want a politics that is less acrimonious, that's more built on consensus and compromise. They want a politics where people can see each other's point of view. They want a politics where people trust each other, where people have some minimal level of trust in the government to complete the tasks that they assign to it, but they trust their fellow citizens. Yes, certainly we have different points of view, but we're all legitimate parts of the political system. We're all good people. We can safely lose an election and be okay. That's what I mean by the thing, that sort of vision of politics. And there's a few different moving parts to that you could separate out, but I tend to group it together in my head. What's wrong with the thing? You may ask, well, this is the thing, there's nothing wrong with the thing. Indeed, there are many very good reasons to want the thing. There is all sorts of data to suggest that there are many sorts of social goods that come online in a high-trust society that aren't available to us in a low-trust society. And while I've never been a huge civility person, I'm not exactly waving the flag for incivility. Of course it would be nicer if politics were less acrimonious. Here's the thing. When I have these conversations, and like I say, I've had a lot of them at this point, we talk about the thing. I agree, yes, no, in many respects the thing would be nice. But then I say, and it's kind of an obvious thought, I say you realise we're not going to get the thing, right? None of that stuff is happening. Political polarisation hasn't come about because people have just decided to behave like assholes. There are deep-seated historical reasons for this. That where we are now is very, very strongly tied to senses of identity that are deep-rooted and are not going away anytime soon. Ditto for lack of trust. And they say, yes, I understand it'll be hard, but given how great the thing is, and I say, but we're not... This isn't, the thing is not what we need to be focusing on right now. That's not really what's on the table. And they'll say, but well, not with that attitude, it's not. To put it a bit more deeply, isn't it your very state of alarm? Isn't it how much you think Donald Trump and the Republican movement are dangerous? Isn't it that attitude that's keeping us here? Isn't it the fact that neither side feels that they can back down, that they can come off DEFCON 5, that both sides need to be in a point of 10 out of 10 alarm, which is also to say often 10 out of 10 vitriolicness? Isn't it your perception of the danger that's causing the danger? in many ways. Well, that's a lovely thought, but it would need to be mutual, would it not? You know, if we all took a step back, sure, but I think we are concerned, and rightly concerned, about any strategy that would amount to unilateral disarmament. And what's more, this isn't a both sides, you know, you're more scared of the rattlesnake's more scared of you than you are of it, and you just need to take a step back and give it its room, and it's not that. Both sides' fears of the other. Now, I'm going to concentrate on the American case in this essay, but a lot of what I have to say would be applicable to many advanced democracies. Both sides' fear of the other aren't equally rationally grounded. They aren't even equally factually true. Donald Trump right now is running on deporting 20 million people and having a day of violence that, in his words, would be very brutal in order to cleanse the state of his political enemies. Will he be able to implement that? Who knows? But there is no equivalent of that on the mainstream left in America. I mean, you can find some crazy communists online or something, but no one who holds office. The problem is not shouting fire in a crowded theatre. The problem is that there is a fire. And any project premised on talking to and about the fire a bit more politely is just fundamentally not recognising the basic reality in which we are living. To which they will say, yeah, I'm not defending Donald Trump. Not a Donald Trump fan. No one hates Donald Trump more than me. But you know, if we could just get to the thing, if we could just have the thing, people like Donald Trump wouldn't arise in the first place. Wouldn't that speak to your concern? And so, it's kind of like a crabwise dance, right? We're not stepping backwards or forwards. It's one step to the side. Yes, but. Yes, but the thing. The thing is good. Yes. But the danger. Yes, the danger. I see, I hear, I understand the danger. But the thing. Yes, the thing. But the danger. And so on and so forth. And it seems to get into this, like, just perfect orbit that doesn't disintegrate but doesn't ever change. And I've thought for a long time, are there ways of thinking and talking about this that would communicate my point more effectively? You know, are there points that I've missed? Are there pieces of evidence or argument or philosophical frameworks or pieces of rhetoric that I can employ that'll sort of cut through, that'll break through that impasse? This essay is not about that. I'm not sure that there are. Now, having just listened to me sort of recount all of that, you, if like about half my audience, you are a strongly socialist, Bernie Sanders type person, you might say, well, Toby, you clearly hang out with too many liberals, because nobody on my section of the left is saying any of that. You know, this is in fact what you're talking about here. This is exactly why people on my section of the left don't have a whole lot of truck with liberals a lot of the time. Yeah, you're right, but like, come join us in Camp Socialist. And listen, I dig Camp Socialist. Big fan. Visited many times. Love what you guys did with the dining room. But in this specific point, there is a socialist or a left version of the thing. It's communicated differently and it's substantively different, but it fills the same role in conversation. And just as I found myself doing this crabwise dance with liberals, I found myself doing this crabwise dance with socialists or leftists or radicals as well. Because what they will say is, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going wrong with neoliberalism and capitalism and inequality and so on and so forth, and, you know, that's their thing, right? That's the thing, that's their project that they're interested in. And isn't it that this Trump thing, this MAGA thing, this far-right thing, isn't that people reacting against neoliberalism? Isn't it because, you know, the Clinton years were good for some, but a lot of people lost out. Those trade deals, globalization, made a lot of people wealthy, but man, those people in the swing states that have been giving you guys trouble, they saw those factories close. Places that had employed their family, men in their family had worked there for 3 generations, and now there's nothing. Now those towns are dying, and can you blame them? I'm not saying it's right, I'm not fully condoning it, but surely it's understandable, right? If you're so concerned about Trump and, you know, fascism and all that, you need to focus on the thing. You know, we need to dismantle global capitalism, and we need to have more economic equality, and it's lack of opportunity. You know, people become very vulnerable to demagogues when they're poor and desperate and so on. Now, I will say, instinctively, intuitively, I'm a bit more sympathetic to that version of the thing. Not because I think it's true. All of the evidence in the world is that it isn't. There is a lot on this now. People are generally not becoming Trump voters out of economic desperation, and they're telling us that they're not. Nor is it the case that greater economic opportunity really, takes people out of the danger zone of becoming in the far right. It doesn't. Nonetheless, I'm sympathetic to this because I think we should strive for egalitarian policies and a more equal society independently as a matter of justice. I think that's something that is a morally urgent project that we should be pursuing. And, you know, yes, let's all of us from, you know, the sort of discomforted centre to progressive liberals to socialists to out-and-out communists, let's all work together to make that happen. I agree. But that is not what's driving this. And again, that is a conversation I've had for literally, you know, dozens of hours of my life, probably at least a dozen publicly. And in both cases, both the sort of liberal, the thing, and the socialist, the thing, for the most part, these conversations are with people I like and respect. I don't think in either case people are coming at this from a place of malevolence or even a place of stupidity or lack of information. I just, with the socialist, the thing, you end up in this little crabwise dance of, yes, the danger, but the thing. Yes, Trump is awful, but if we just, you know, did the thing. And I'm like, yes, the thing, I agree with the thing. More than civility, yes. Economic equality, yes. But there is a real and present danger that is independent of that. Here's where I've sort of landed with that. Ultimately, I don't think this is about knowledge. There's a sort of low version of this and a high version of this. People will certainly say these sorts of things who don't know very much, but equally people will say these sorts of things who know a great deal. I don't think it's about intelligence. Some of the people I'm thinking of are smarter than me, right? And that's not false modesty. You know, like, I have a healthy appreciation for my own capacities. I'm also realistic about them. It's not even really about ideology. Like I say, I've sort of given you a liberal version and a socialist version. Those are the counts I've sort of dealt with the most. There's sort of an institutional Democratic Party version that says, oh, maybe if we had a really robust filibuster or something, the Joe Manchin version, it would all go away. There's like a centre-right version. And I'm not going to go through them all because, I could do an episode on each, and I've written episodes and not published them on here's why I just sort of feel like, be it the Liberal version, the Democratic Party version, the Socialist version of the thing, are not exactly wrong. The thing is a nice thing, but are missing the point. And where I've landed, though, is it's not about that. It's not about reasons and logic and so on. I've really thought, are there ways I can better explain or present myself? Is there something I'm not hearing from the other side? It's not that. I think at some level you just kind of intuitively get it, or you don't. What do I mean by get it? If my entire explanation of this is going to hinge on that phrase. What do I mean by get it? That this is real. That when Trump says he's going to deport 20 million people and the crowd applauds, they're not joking. There's an irreverent aspect to it. There's a playful aspect to it. But they will try and do this. That people mean what they say. That even people who are sort of dishonest and say a lot of stuff to get a rise out of you, substantively they mean it. Yes, they're saying the racist thing in a jokey way, but they really are also racists. And get that this being real and people really believing in it really is that dangerous. That there is some possibility of this political project succeeding. And as much as anything, get that whatever you want to call it, fascism, authoritarianism, far-right populism, get that this is not a movement that can be reasoned with or compromised with. Individuals within it certainly can be talked out of it, and certainly people who are on the periphery of it are amenable to reason and emotion and persuasion, but not the thing as a collective. There is no amount of civility, nor even, though it pains me to say it, amount of economic equality that will make the most committed people in far-right neo-Nazi forums stop thinking what they think. Oh, but surely it would mitigate it to the point where they're just an irrelevant minority. That's a nice thought. There is a lot of very hard data to suggest that that is not the case. So when I say get it, I mean appreciate a set of fairly obvious descriptions of the world. I think I can argue for all of those things and give you reasons for them and so on. I don't think what I've said is that wild. But I think there's something more visceral to it than that. I think, it either clicks with you or it doesn't. Really appreciating that fairly obvious description is just a very, very different way of experiencing politics than engaging it in an abstract level briefly and then turning away from it. There's a big difference between, I guess, what you could call abstract risk versus lived risk. So, for instance, if you ever do philosophy, you'll get, or actually economics will do this sometimes too as a way of thinking about uncertainty, you'll get situations which would be terrifying and horrible to live through, like the trolley problem or something. In economics, you'll get questions like, would you play Russian roulette with one bullet in the chamber for £1 million or dollars, say, right? So, you've got to think, would that payoff be worth a 1 in 6 chance of losing your life? And you sort of think about it, and some people would say, even for 1 in 6, not doing it. Some people will say, for that amount, and you can sort of say, okay, what about 2 million, so on and so forth, and people can sort of entertain it as an abstract idea, right? But if I told you, and this was real, and you knew it was real, no bluff, no bullshit, in 1 week's time, I am going to put you are in a deer hunter situation. You're a prisoner of war in which your captors will make you play Russian roulette for their own sadistic amusement. In a week's time, I am going to put a gun to your head with 1 bullet in the chamber, and I'm going to pull the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times, whatever. You are going to play Russian roulette in a week. You cannot get out of it, and you cannot change that. I promise you, every single aspect of how you experience the world, your psychology, your levels of adrenaline, your attentiveness will be different. You would not sleep for that week. You would be beside yourself for that week if you really had to do it. Right? What I mean by getting it is understanding that there is a real gun put to the head of our society right now. And it is loaded. And I don't know how many bullets are in there, but there's at least 1, and we are going to pull the trigger. Repeatedly. We are going to have elections which we can lose with real fricking authoritarians. There's a difference between understanding that and just engaging with it at an abstract level. I think people who want the thing, it's not quite that they don't see that, they dismiss it. They put it to one side. Or, and I've heard this, they just think we're wrong to experience politics that way. They just think, like politics shouldn't be something that's making you that upset or getting you that stressed out. It should be, one part of your life, but something you can easily detach yourself from and then re-engage with later, better, rested, stronger. Something I've observed in both personal situations and in how people process politics is those who demand your empathy the most often don't give it. People who sort of say, in a slightly condescending tone, you've got to see it from this other person's point of view. You've got to, what you're not understanding is from this other person sees it like this. People who say that are usually quite bad at seeing it from your point of view. And I think that's true in the political case as well. People who say, look, I understand, MAGA is bad, very bad, but you've got to see it from their point of view. If you were as economically desperate and culturally isolated and looked down upon and disrespected, you would turn to people who are at least providing strength and answers and so on. You've got to see it from their point of view politically. That person who says that is usually very bad at seeing it from yours. They usually, I think, just aren't aware that some people really are experiencing politics like the Russian roulette case. Or, at the very least, they don't want to give time and space. They don't want to give empathic attention to that in the way that they're giving empathic attention to the far right and demanding empathic attention for the far right. People who want the thing won't exactly say you're wrong to be scared. They won't disagree exactly, but it's like, okay, sure, but can I get back to what I wanted to talk about? So that's what I mean by getting it. That for some people, and I think it's a fairly small minority of people, the fact that the thing that seems dangerous is actually real and it actually is dangerous just clicks. Yeah, it's real. It really is dangerous. Now, and that is kind of like not really, you can't logic an argument someone into it clicking. It's either going to click or it isn't. And you can tell from talking to people for whom it clicks and for whom it doesn't. I'm not sure why. For some people, it just seems to click, and others, it doesn't. It doesn't seem to closely track with ideology. Like I say, there's a left version of the thing, and there's a liberal version of the thing. But, you know, I've in terms of people for whom I'd say do get it, they're sort of across the spectrum from the centre-right to the far left. And, you know, indeed, I think both the centre and the left have beliefs that stop people getting it. I don't mean to say that people who don't get it are uncaring exactly. I think they care very much about some things. I think the centrists really do care about this idea of civil liberal discussion. I think they feel passionately in favour of it. And it really is something that excites them. And I think, conversely, the left is really genuinely, to their core, outraged by many of the injustices and inequalities of the world. That's not fake. But it's exactly, to take the left case, the fact that they're so tuned in to what is wrong with the world as it is, that kind of can blind them in many respects to just how much worse things could get. Those thoughts are things are bad, but they could get worse. Those are perfectly logically compatible ideas, but it's just kind of a very different emotional bandwidth to be on. So it's not an ideological position as such. You might say what you're talking about is privilege, right? The people who aren't going to lose out over Trump, they're, your white middle-class people who are presumably a lot of these academics you're interviewing, and, sorry Toby, but just judging on vibes, probably a lot of the people you work with and talk to about this in your personal life. You know, they're not in danger, or not as in as much danger. I'm not sure that's right either. You know, yes, certainly there are many middle class people who don't get it, but there are some who are. There are some people who, on paper, are very privileged, but are nonetheless really existentially concerned. And you know, I can think of, I mean, at least a couple of the people I'm thinking of, when I say people who want the thing, are like, not white people from affluent backgrounds or anything, so it doesn't obviously relate to class or even race necessarily, although, it might vary a bit. I haven't done any sort of empirical study on this. The one thing I have noticed, if I were to try and draw a set around the people I've interviewed who I say are in the get it camp, and in my personal life it's a bit larger because I hang out with activists, so I have a good sample size there. But in both cases, I would say it's almost always women. Not absolutely exclusively, but it's not a 60-40 thing. It's like a 90-10 thing. Not all women. I think when I talk about people who get it, I'm talking about mid-single digits of the population here. So most women don't, but of the people who do, it is like 90% women. Now, I should be clear about the limits of that observation. I'm talking anecdotally. But with that said, my sample size is still enough to border on the statistically significant, although it's not obviously a randomly drawn one at all. I'm also talking from judgment. I don't know what's in anyone's head. But people tell you how they feel, and I think actually by and large people are honest about how they feel, and when people say they feel really afraid about this, they're usually just telling you the truth, right? You can also, I don't generally ask my guests super personal questions on the podcast, but you can tell in the language they use, in inflection, in what they prioritise, in what they come back to. And, from that, I would say it's such a clear trend that it does jump out, and I'd be super curious, DM me, email me, whatever, if that matches your sort of experience with this, that of the people who are very, very alarmed by, or to put it differently, and I think more fairly, are correctly recognising the danger of the far right in the present moment, there is a definite gender bias. Something else I've noticed, I would also say, conversely, that people who really, really, really genuinely want the thing skew heavily male. Because most people, aren't in the getting it camp, but they aren't super invested in arguing for the thing either, right? The people who are, range of ideology, range of backgrounds, range of sort of overall where they are in society, mostly guys. So I do want to be careful with that observation. It's a tentative observation, and with enough argument the other way I would probably walk it back, but it has very much rung true for me. And it does, and this is what sort of convinced me I had enough for a sort of audio essay here, it does line up a lot with a number of other sort of theory aspects of this. Not like your logical points, but just like how the conversation proceeds and how we engage in it. But first, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying there is a male point of view and a female one. I am not saying the male point of view is to underrate the dangers of the far right and focus on other things, and the female point of view is to correctly be alarmed by it. I just think that's a really bad way of looking at things, and it almost always gets us into unhelpful conversations. You see this in online discourse about dating, which is also in a very toxic place right now, where a lot of people are sort of speaking about and for an entire gender, and they'll say things like, what you have to understand is men just see it like this, or women just see it like this. And this is always like, not just not helpful, it's not accurate. There was a big debate a while ago about how, again in dating discourse, what was it? It was like, is it an insult to say to someone, I wouldn't see you as someone I would hook up with, but you are someone I'd marry? And people were saying, oh, men really strongly feel that is an insult, and women really strongly feel that it wasn't, and everyone was at each other's throats about it. And obviously something like that is context dependent. And obviously not every man and every woman feel the same way. There may very well be statistical differences in the aggregate. It may be something like, 60% of men have a positive view of short-term relationships and hookups, whereas only 40% of women do. But there's still men who aren't into that and women who are. You know what I mean? I think getting into the point of view where we stop seeing ourselves as individuals and start seeing ourselves as representatives of our gender just virtually never sets us up for any sort of meaningful conversation. It's just, it's such a bad way of looking at things. So I'm not saying there's a male point of view and a female point of view. I'm saying there's a range of point of views on the danger of the far right now. Most people, I think, are underrating the danger in one way or another. And I would say there is a gender disparity in the people who are taking it seriously. That's my sort of claim stroke observation, nothing more than that. I also don't know, assuming I'm right here, why. It would be easy to invent a story and to say something like, well, overall, women are in much more danger of sexual violence from men. They're in much more danger, or statistically more likely to experience X, Y, and Z. Therefore, that makes it more likely that they would also see a danger in the Trump movement. You could make a story like that. I think that's all you'd be doing. You'd be making up a story. I'm not sure how you'd test the validity of that, especially as these aren't dots that people are connecting consciously. I think if you asked the people I'm thinking of when I say, why do they get it? They would say, well, because look at this thing Trump said, look at what the far right is saying, look at what happened on January 6th. They'd give you reasons, right, and correctly so, reasons I agree with. I'm not sure, and I'd love to hear, if you're in this category, why you think this might be the case. So I don't have a grand theory of that. And I think sometimes you don't need a grand theory. I call this in social sciences correlation plus speculation, that you notice a trend. Statistically, these people are more likely to do whatever, and then you speculate as to why. But sometimes it's enough to just notice a trend. Like, you don't have to have some ultimate causal explanation for it. And I'm not quite sure what it is for this one, if I'm being entirely honest. What I do think is that this has fed into, or is in some sort of relationship with, the way we talk about this debate is codedly gendered. What do I mean by that? A lot, I would say almost all, of our archetypes for strongly anti-Trump people are implicitly or explicitly female. When we think about and we describe, and we use words and language to describe, people who are the most alarmed by Trump and the MAGA movement, we say one thing that people have said a lot is wine mums, conjuring an image of a suburban middle-class woman who perhaps has a sign in her front yard saying, like, in this house we believe that science is real, and ... and posts on Facebook memes about how much she dislikes Trump. There's sort of just a stereotype, archetype, whatever you want to call it, wine mums, but that's a phrase that's used. Why is it female? Another one is this idea of liberals being at brunch. So this came up, where did this come from? This came from in both 2016 and 2020. There was an idea that, the socialist left takes Trump seriously and will beat him, and all these liberals who are screaming so hard about how much they hate Trump, they'll be at brunch after the election and will still be doing the hard work. Now, as it turns out, that prediction was almost entirely wrong. Liberals very much of the type described here, that your brunching liberals, very much stayed mobilised against Trump. And honestly, if I'm being real, socialist friends, it's debatable how much socialists did. But that's not what I'm focusing on. Why brunch? What? A meal? A tasty, delicious meal? You're too online if you know what I'm referencing there. But why brunch? Why is that why isn't liberals will still be at the Denny's getting their bacon and eggs? Why is it brunch? I would argue because brunch is female coded. Getting brunch with the girlfriends, having some mimosas, like that, that conjures to mind women, right? Whereas Denny's bacon and eggs, that's masculine coded. There's also a lot of terms that haven't originally meant this, but have come to be applied to sort of the strongly anti-Trump people. One of the things I've noticed is girl boss. Have you heard this? Girl boss. It originally started as sort of a critique of corporate women and a certain form of female representation in media. But now it's beginning to get applied to just like, if you're a woman online and you're sort of saying we really need to stay focused on the danger of Trump and the far right, people say, okay, girl boss. That's not what that term was originally coined to critique, so why is it getting used? Why, when you're critiquing someone for being, like, excessively alarmed by Trump, are you feeling the need to use this heavily gendered term? Or, again, this has died off now, but through the first Trump presidency, people used to talk about pussy hat liberals, which is, the pink hats that people were wearing on the women's marches immediately, or sort of in the aftermath of Trump winning in 2016. So again, that's explicitly tying in liberals. Even something like when people talk about resist libs or normie libs, those aren't explicitly or even implicitly gendered terms, but I'd argue if you sort of listen to the context of how they're being used, I'm pretty sure that when people talk about a resist lib, they're almost always imagining a woman. They may not be aware that that's where their head's going with that, but I think it's kind of subtly gendered. That's my claim. Almost all of our archetypes for strongly anti-Trump people are coded as female. Now, I've found that a lot of people are really, really, really resistant to this take. They just sort of go to, like, straight to I'm not sexist. Why are you calling me sexist? I've got nothing against women. Socialism and the Bernie movement are much more pro-feminist than mainline liberalism. That's not quite what I'm saying. And look, this is a subtle thing, so if you don't want to see it, you're not going to. But listen, in principle, it shouldn't be that wild. We've had a lot of analysis, and good analysis, and I think correctly recognised as good analysis, as about how language can convey coded stereotypes. When Reagan talks about welfare queens, or modern Republicans talk about inner city thugs, they're talking about black people, right? They may not say that they are, but they are. Now, these stereotypes can be received subconsciously, and they can also be used subconsciously. You can pick up this language and recycle it, and there's the idea in the back of your head, but you're not consciously thinking, when I say thugs, I'm talking about black people, but you're still participating in a language game that is racialized, right? So I think the idea that our language might have coded gender roles in it just should not be wild at all. It's also on a continuum with how Republicans have used very gendered language about liberals and the left for a long time now. Going back to, I would say, at least the Newt Gingrich era, their catchphrases, their little things that they repeat, are so much about how liberals are feminine or effeminate or insufficiently masculine or queer. Like, in the 90s they would say latte-sipping liberals. Similar to the brunch thing. Why latte? Because it's female-coded. Black coffee is male-coded, right? It's actually a bit even more overt now. You got, like, soy boy. For some reason, exactly what goes in your coffee is a deep existential concern for Republicans, but soy boy, beta male, cuck, right? This is all like, they're calling you a woman or they're calling you gay, basically, right? Like, that's what that language means. So that our inter-liberal, inter-left dialogue should have taken on a gender coding doesn't seem that wild to me. Now, I'm not sure which way the causality goes here. So, in other words, did the fact that we have a gendered description of people who are alarmed by Trump, did that mean that less men get it? It sort of made taking that view less acceptable, less palatable to men? Or did the fact that more women get it lead to the gendered description? I imagine it's a bit of both, and it's a bit of a feedback loop. And that's as close as I'm going to get to fleshing out any sort of causal mechanism here, that you have a bit of a feedback loop between a gender difference in the people who get it and gendered language in how we describe it. That, plus the right's history of gendered labelling, I suspect fed into this in some way at some level, but I'm not sure. I also think, while I'm sort of connecting up dots to other things that we know are happening, I think this might go some way to explaining the opening gender gap. So it's been the case for quite some time in American politics that women are more liberal than men. Again, on aggregate, of course, there's plenty of conservative women and plenty of liberal men. Again, I am not saying there is a male point of view and a female point of view, but women for a long time have voted a few points more democratic and identified as liberal a few points more than men in the States. It has also been the case for a long time that young people are more liberal than old people. And those are patterns we see across the world. What's happened recently is, while young women have always been, for those reasons, one of the more liberal sort of subsections of society, that recently has increased massively. Young people have always been more liberal than old people, but they're now much more liberal. The percentage gap is much larger, and all of that difference is young women. It's not young men. Young men are either staying about where they were, or by some accounts, and depending on what sort of polling you buy, moving slightly more conservative. I'm kind of ambivalent on if they're staying the same or moving a bit more conservative. I could see the case for both. What I think is undeniable is that young women have lurched something like 30 points to the left here. When did this start? Well, funny you should ask. It started around 2015, 2016, and it's accelerated over the few years since then, and it continues to grow. Well, what happened in 2016, everyone? I don't think it takes a genius to connect the dots here. People are sort of talking about, oh, well, maybe it's the rise of TikTok and women watch a bit more TikTok than men. And yeah, sure, I'm sure there's a range of causality behind this, but what happened in 2016? I think what I'm talking about here, about there being a strong gender gap in terms of the people most alarmed, definitely ties into that. I think women were, certainly there were a lot of men who were against Trump and voted the right way and so on, but the people who were panicked, who felt like the country was about to be lost, the people who called you on election night in a genuine state of existential crisis, tended to be women. And I think, here's what I'm not saying. All women feel that way, therefore that's the gender gap. Again, I think we're talking about quite a small percentage. But people's friendship groups are increasingly gender segregated. So more women will know someone who does get it, and they'll be motivated by that. People who are quasi-political very much will follow the lead of the most political person in their friendship group, whereas men are much less likely to have a friend who gets it. And just to be honest, men also do tend to dismiss women's fears. I think one of the way we're sort of brought up and raised and masculinized, if that's a word, is to kind of react to women's alarm with a sort of calm down, dear, condescending tone. So I just think the fact that more women are more likely to know and are more likely to take seriously someone who gets it, I bet you that's a factor in the opening up of the gender gap. Okay, you might say. Okay, so let's just go with you here. Say there is a bit of a gender gap in people's alarm about Trump and the far right. And let's even say, it sounds a bit wishy-washy and liberal sociologist to me, but, let's even say there's a bit of a gendered aspect, a codedly gendered aspect to how we discuss and describe anti-fascism. And sure, if that's all true, I can totally see how that has something to do with the gender voting gap and the gender gap in terms of identification with liberalism or conservatism. Cute take. So what? I think it goes further than that. I think our gendered descriptions, which again are often implicit, often very subtle, often subconscious, our gendered descriptions have bled into our moral evaluations and our assessment of moral blameworthiness. How language can feed into that is something that is very well studied in the history of feminist thought. An absolutely classic example would be a linguistic analysis of the phrase battered woman. Laura is a battered woman. We don't use this phrase as much anymore, I think precisely because of this sort of feminist analysis, but like in the 80s, the 90s, whatever, if you're talking about a woman who's experiencing physical violence, domestic abuse from her husband, you talk about that they're a battered woman. Laura is a battered woman. But then what feminists do will call attention to the way that frames moral responsibility. So a more neutral, objective description might be John beats his wife, Laura, right? John is the object in that sentence. He's the one who's, by the sort of structure of the sentence, being given agency, and so it would seem to follow he is the one who has responsibility. If you were to ask what is the issue and what should we do, the issue is John's behaviour, and what should we do is he needs to stop, right? But then it becomes Laura is beaten by John. Laura becomes the sentence of the object of the sentence. John's role is diminished, and it goes on through iterations. There's like 4 or 5 different iterations, and it ends up in Laura is a battered woman, in which John has disappeared completely. John, not only far from having agency and being held accountable, isn't even part of our description. That subtly but powerfully affects our moral judgment. Instead of saying, what the hell is John's problem and what do we need to do to restrain him, we're saying, well, where did this problem come from for Laura? What does she need to do? I think something similar has happened here politically. People who don't get it tend not to hold the right morally accountable. They're not even really considered at all in moral analysis. The moral analysis is what should liberals do? How should liberals respond? We're the agent. We're the one who can be held morally accountable. The right are just a force of nature, or just removed from the picture altogether. It's a small and it's a silly example, but after the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade and meant that abortion became illegal in most places in America, there was a great many people who were very, very angry and really, really holding morally accountable the Democrats. How could you let this happen? Now, that's not to say that Democratic Party policy or campaigning on abortion has always been perfect, but that seemed bizarre to a lot of people. Why? And I remember an interaction where someone asked, why aren't you angry with Republicans? They're the ones who voted for these justices, knowing that they'd be appointed, and the justices did that. Why aren't you angry with the voters, the senators who appointed them, the conservative justices? And someone said, if my house is on fire and the fire brigade isn't doing anything, I'm not going to be angry at the fire. I'm going to be angry at the fire brigade. And I thought, well, that's just perfect. That is exactly how you see the right, as something very dangerous and damaging, but not possessing of agency. Not possessing... I think we figure the right is always going to behave badly, and so there's no sense trying to hold them accountable. They're just a force of nature, or discounted altogether. The conversation entirely focuses around what either liberals should do in the form of the institutional Democratic Party or what liberals should do in their day-to-day life. Once you get that point in which the actual abuser has just sort of been implicitly taken out of the picture, moral responsibility is then relocated to the female-coded side, and I think we're just all implicitly trained to do this, and I think once something becomes female-coded, we start doing it with it. What did you say to make him hit you? If you are a battered woman, why? What did you do to provoke that? Now that, unfortunately, is a very, very common question that female victims of abuse get. You might think people would know better, but they don't. What did you say to make him hit you? That's obviously a very extreme and unpleasant case, but you see a very analogous move with the denial of agency, and hence responsibility, to the abuser in the political case, and the placing of responsibility on the victim. The right are not given any agency. They had no choice but to react to the provocations of the left. The left, the liberals, they need to take a look at themselves. What did they do to provoke this? And so much of the analysis, the political analysis from both centrists and the left about why people find Trump and Trumpism attractive is about what liberals supposedly did to provoke it. You have to understand, liberals did globalization and neoliberalism to them. Hillary called them a basket of deplorables. They were sneered at and looked down on. They had no part in mainstream culture. You have to understand that, of course, they're going to act up and lash out. Empathy, in this case, but not agency, is given to them. Whereas for liberals, we have to sit and think about what we did. It's also seen as solely liberals, again female-coded, responsibility to fix. You should say this, is always the tone. You being either individual liberals or liberalism represented collectively in the institution of the Democratic Party. Not I say this, you should say this. I have a Trump-supporting uncle. And when liberals say X, Y, and Z, that really sets him off. So you should stop saying that. You should stop saying that, not me. Not what... And I always want to ask, what are you doing? You know, you're saying, oh, here's some advice on how to talk to my Trump-supporting uncle. What are you saying to your Trump-supporting uncle? You're the one with the relationship there. You're the one with standing to enter into a critique of him. What are you saying? Are you saying anything? Or do you just assume that that's liberals' job? More broadly, and often implicitly, I think it's expected that liberals provide the thing, right? When people talk about civility and partisanship, now in theory that applies to both sides, right? You both need to calm down. In practice, they're almost always talking to liberals. Liberals say you want pluralism and tolerance, right? So lead by example. Start by tolerating those who will not tolerate you. Liberalism is held responsible for all of the failings of the global economy, which is, you know, the collective result of the decisions of many states, which at best are partially liberal and many are not liberal at all. But if liberals want people to stop voting Trump, they should fix economic inequality. Not conservatives should. Given that this cancer is impacting conservatism's base much more than it is ours, you'd think, if anything, they have more responsibility to do it, but somehow no. We don't think about conservatives as having moral responsibility. Indeed, the fact that conservatives block liberal attempts that would directly aid their supporters is seen as the problem of liberals. Finally, there's a strong tendency to underrate or dismiss women's fear. Like I said earlier, there's a strong instinct to say, calm down, dear, right? And I think that carries over to female-coded things. People won't quite say that they think the threat of Trump is made up, but they talk as if we're clearly exaggerating. If Democrats really believed that Trump was such a threat, wouldn't they run on Medicare for all, given how popular it is? If Democrats really believed that Trump was such a threat, why are they running this candidate that I dislike? If Democrats really believed that Trump was such a threat, blah, blah, blah. I hear that all the time, and it's such a bizarre thing to say. Like, we can debate Democratic Party messaging and platform and candidates. I'll probably think they're a bit better than you're giving them credit for, though far from perfect, but that's beside the point. It's a bizarre sentiment. It's like saying the house isn't on fire because the fire brigade hasn't shown up yet. And we're both looking at the house and it's on fire. And you're saying, well, if it was really on fire, wouldn't the fire brigade have shown up by now? What are you talking about? Like, that doesn't make sense. And yet people who are smart will say it. And I think they say it because they're kind of processing things through a gendered lens. I think because of the implicitly coded language that we use, both generally, like I say, going back to Gingrich and latte-sipping liberals, to the more modern beta males and cucks, up to this sort of gendered coding in fears about Trump, where the most Trump-fearful people get coded as female. I think, not consciously, but subconsciously, that bleeds into people's thoughts to the degree that they are conceptualizing, again subconsciously, abstract entities like conservatism and liberalism and specific strains of liberalism as having a gender. And I think they're morally evaluating them through the lens of how we let gender change and corrupt our day-to-day interpersonal moral evaluations. Now, here's what I'm very much not saying. What I am not saying is men are acting rationally and women emotionally, and what men need to do is understand women's emotions. That is not at all what I'm saying. For one thing, I'm not talking about most women here. I'm talking about a minority of women who, like I say in my language, get it. Probably very 10% or something at absolute most. For another, being gender-coded is not the same thing as being that gender. I can, and in this case I very much am, partaking in a behaviour, arguing for a position which is female-coded, right? So something being female or male-coded doesn't relate to actual gender. It's a language and a set of sort of concepts and archetypes that we have. But to take this on directly, I have talked about it being visceral and it being real for some people. That is the rational reaction. That is the appropriate reaction. The sane reaction. I talked about Russian roulette. Someone who was in a deer hunter scenario in which they were a captive prisoner of war who was going to be made to play Russian roulette for their captors' sadistic amusement, who said, Imagine the person next to you when you're going to have to play this game said, yes, 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 I know we'll be playing Russian roulette tomorrow, but what we really need to focus on is X, Y, Z. And just nothing about their tone and cadence. That is someone who acted as if it's just a story, who is not living in the real world, or is not living in the world that they verbally acknowledge the reality of. Being kept up all night by the thought of doing that is how someone behaves who has, at some level, grappled with the reality of their circumstance. Here's what it's like to be on our side of this. I said before, I think people who want the thing often aren't very good at empathising with people who get it. Here's what it's like to be us. Imagine we're chained together. We've got like a handcuffs to me, handcuffs to you, and we're standing in the middle of the road. And in the distance, we can see that this massive 18-wheeler truck is hurtling downhill towards us. We've got a bit of time, we can get out the way, but it is coming and fast and downhill, and it does not look like it's stopping. And I say, so we should move. And you say, yes, 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 no, I see the truck, absolutely. But what we really need to think about is zoning in this town. Now, hear me out, because if zoning were different, there probably wouldn't be as much speeding, and this danger might be different, and that's really what we should focus on. Okay, yeah, sure, but let's get out of the way. Hang on. It's you tugging and pulling and, getting worked up. This is why we can never have a rational conversation about zoning reform. And I'm looking, and the truck is getting closer and closer and closer. Okay. We can have a conversation. Can we get out the way first? No. It's you panicking and whatever. That's not helping. It's not helping. There's a truck coming. I know there's a truck coming, but if you just relax for a minute, we are going to die. Now, come on. If you really believed that, you wouldn't be standing here. It's both of us. We both get hit or we don't. Okay, you know what? I don't want to die. I'm going to listen. Tell me about the zoning reform. Quickly, please. Okay, it goes on and on very long. Okay, I've listened about the zoning reform. Can we move now? Well, hang on. At which point you say, for fuck's sake, what is wrong with you? And you try and pull them out the road. And they grab you and they say, no, and then you get scolded. No, don't you do that. Don't you grab me. Don't you try and pull me out the road. That is not appropriate behaviour. This is why the truck is coming in the first place. It's because you get so hysterical, you get so emotional about this. No, you need to calm down. And you're stuck. Because if you say, okay, no, sure, tell me about the zoning, you feel they're going to drone on and on and on and on and on, and you're going to get hit by the truck. But if you just for fuck's sake, and you try and snap them out of it and just pull them out the way, they're going to get angry with you for doing that. See, this is why, right? This is what it feels like to be us. If a truck is barreling towards you, and you say, yes, I see the truck, but you don't step out of the way of the truck, in what sense, really, can you be said to believe in the reality of the truck? Again, having an emotional reaction, having a sense of, hell, I've got to jump out the way, I've got to get to the side of the road, having that thing, that snap that this is real, got to move, that has an emotional component to it, but that also is the rational reaction to that truck. That is the sane reaction. That is the reaction of someone who is participating in the world in which they find themselves. Do people really feel that way about Trump? Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say him specifically. I'd say the fact that the far right is currently at a high watermark. But yes, I think one of the things people who don't get it don't get is how much we've really thought about the worst case scenarios here. I mean, here's some things I think about, right? And this isn't really that outlandish, we have had racist riots in the UK. Like I say, I think this is a global problem. I've been focusing on the US case, but recently we had racist riots in the UK in which people tried to set fire to hotels because there were asylum seekers in them and presumably they wanted to kill them. Thankfully they didn't succeed. From the videos I've seen, they weren't particularly bright, to be fair. I don't care about being intellectually condescending to racists because they can go fuck themselves. So they didn't succeed, but they could have done. In America right now, Trump is gleeful about the fact that Haitian immigrants, after being, let's be clear, completely falsely accused of stealing and eating people's pets, are now getting threats of violence and are in fear for their lives. This is someone who's never really walked back January 6th or said anything wrong happened there. This is someone who delights in political violence, so here's what I worry about, and like I say, I don't think it's a big jump. I think we're going to see pogroms. I think it's on the table as a possibility. I think we're going to see large-scale, racially motivated, violent outbursts that kill a lot of people. I think that's something that could very much happen. It could happen in Europe, it could happen in America. And judging by the response of the UK state, even a few thousand idiotic white nationalists stretched our capacity to breaking point. America's a bit more militarised, but what if that militarised police is in the hands of someone who sides with the racists? Which brings me on to my next thing. America's justice system is flawed in many ways that we've talked about, but it's there. What if the safeguards get short-circuited and this movement just really starts just disappearing people? Because they are not above that. These are absolutely the type of people who, if they are in a position to disappear people, will disappear people. What about if that happens? Just selfishly, I know so many people who are political commentators and activists and so on. I don't want to feel afraid for my friends. And what's more, when people talk about this, they talk about it jokingly. Let's say the US really goes down this road and Canada doesn't. People go, oh, lol, then I'll move to Canada or I'll move to the EU. And I swear to God, every politically involved American thinks there's a visa process in other first world countries for Americans who just decided they didn't like Trump, and I'm here to tell you there isn't. If you need to get out of America, prepare to run headlong into one of the most hostile immigration systems ever devised by man. This has been a rough 3 years for me. Even navigating in fairly normal-ish, there was a pandemic, but normal-ish times to merely get my legal spouse permission to stay in the UK. Again, selfishly, I do not want the next 20 years of my life to be about helping my friends, which of course I will do, try and navigate the insane and hostile British and European immigration systems, which will only get more hostile in the flux of a mass wave of political refugees from America. And that even assumes that the EU will be a safe place to come to. It seems pretty clear to me that Trump and those around him will not support Ukraine in the same way that the Biden administration has done, in that they like Putin, they admire Putin. Putin represents to them the sort of social conservatism that they ideologically aspire to and the sort of authoritarian control that they believe is their due. They will cut a deal and part of Europe will fall, and what next? At a guess, and just because one-man authoritarians invariably always do think this way, Maybe Putin will start rolling into other states as well. Recover the lost Russian Empire. I don't really know him. Well, I mean, obviously I don't know him personally, but I don't know a huge amount about him. I've read a couple of biographies. He seems like exactly the sort to have delusions of grandeur. What if Europe fully becomes consumed by war again? What if and again, selfishly, I do not want to be living in the type of economy that even countries that didn't face, full-blown occupation had to deal with in World War II. I don't want to have rationing or be poor or not be able to keep the electricity on all day. This will be the least of anyone's problems. I don't want that. Could we please not do that, given that the choices that will lead us there are all entirely avoidable? And all of this is stuff that I think is like on the table in the short to medium run. There's a number of stops between mere authoritarianism and true fascist totalitarianism, but there's no reason we can't go through all of those stops. Other countries have. Have you ever been part of an organisation, like a company you work for, something like that, that's just unravelled? You probably haven't, but, you can be in a case where, the budget isn't coming in, or just purely internal problems. People on staff form factions against each other, the higher-ups are, fighting to get each other fired, and just systematic failures of both individuals and cultures and finances and structures all compound each other. And even organisations that seemingly on paper should be quite stable can just take themselves out sometimes. Things can just go wrong in complex, unpredictable and interconnected ways. And once you get in that point, it is so hard to pull back. Being in that position, in a workplace where the worst thing that will happen is that you have to quit or you get fired and you leave on bad terms without a reference. The worst thing that can happen is that. Being in that position is one of the worst, most stressful and unpleasant and damaging things you can go through. Map that up to society. Now, you might say, okay, Toby, you seem to be just reading current events through some of your past trauma. Maybe. Sure, there is no view from nowhere. We all make sense of the world through our life histories. But in the same vein, I think many of you are processing this through your lack of trauma. I think most people in first world countries have led lives that, while they've certainly had their ups and downs, they've certainly had their challenges and obstacles, and they're far from the people at the top of society, have still led lives that have not set them up to be imaginatively equipped to visualise total system failures in anything other than an abstract sense, or even to properly just price in that possibility. And this is as someone who will be least impacted by America becoming authoritarian. I can easily own that. Like I say, I lived in America for a long time. I'm back in the UK now. Although the UK has its own problems, as I just referenced, I don't think we're quite as far down the line. Also, just be real, I am a straight white man. So I'll probably be in considerably less danger. But I think people can often use, acknowledge your privilege. I think that's a good instinct, by and large. But I think in this case, people can use acknowledge your privilege as yet one more reason to not take this seriously. After all, it won't hurt them, right? There's this statement that's sometimes made that privileged people, your white upper middle class people, they don't have to worry, they're protected from Trump, that being anti-fascist is about concern for others, which it is, but that it won't touch you. Here's the thing, it will. When the Dobbs decision happened, the decision which decriminalised abortion in much of America, there was this line that got spouted by a lot of the left. We said it to ourselves over and over again. Elizabeth Warren said it, which I was quite disappointed in, that rich middle-class white women will always find a way to safely have abortions. What we're talking about here is the poor, the marginalised, people of colour, so on and so forth. Now, it is certainly the case that those groups have been, disproportionately impacted by the Dobbs decision. Certainly. It is pretty clear now, not the case, that no affluent women will be harmed by this. Many have. Mid-20th century fascism killed a lot of people. It also killed a lot of its own citizens. Nazi Germany, Mussolini's Italy, killed a lot of Aryan, able-bodied men, and killed them for no good reason. Now, obviously the level of risk was very, very different, but no one in those societies was safe. You are not safe from fascism now. I think acknowledge your privilege is a good instinct and a necessary instinct a lot of the time. And in this case, absolutely, we should be clear that the sort of right-wing authoritarianism we're talking about will impact different groups very differently. I worry that upper-class white people will be safe thought is kind of giving people permission to think, well, it won't touch me. There is a reason that many of us hold anti-fascism as a foundational commitment, as something that always takes priority, which can never be compromised on, because it destroys everything, any other political project you might want to pursue, anyone you care about, your own safety. Hitler expected hundreds of thousands of men trapped after the Stalingrad defeat to die fighting for no obvious strategic purpose, and considered them doing so an end in itself, a great and glorious thing. He compared it to Leonidas at Thermopylae, a historic battle that, I'll note, also has an outsized place in the imagination of the modern far-right. I'm not saying the same in every respect, but there are political pathologies in this world that will kill us all if given a chance. Now, I don't know what the odds are of that true worst-case scenario. With the Russian roulette example, I can tell you what the odds are if there's one bullet or two or three. I don't know if the odds of a first world country like America falling are 15%, 25%, or 50%. But it is one of those numbers. This isn't a 0.1% or a 1% type thing. One of the questions people ask me is, how can people still be supporting Trump? I just don't get it. And I think I've been answering that question wrong. I've been answering it at face value, in a sort of intellectual sense. How can people still be supporting Trump? Well, people absorb their media from very different streams. How you're encountering Trump is very different to how someone on Fox News is encountering Trump. There's this long history about identity in America. Blah, 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 go on very long. And at the end of it, the person who said that, this is more in everyday life than on the podcast, the person who said that is kind of looking a bit unsatisfied with the answer. And I think I've been answering this dumbly. I've been answering that question a bit like someone who says the thing. There's a moral undertone to it, right? I think what's really being asked is it time to start holding voters, not just politicians, but voters, morally blameworthy? I talked about getting it or not. This is kind of like getting it light, or people who are like getting it curious. The question is there any context I need before I start considering them bad people? And the answer is no. Not a long, weird, long-winded political science rant. No, there's not a context you need before considering them bad people. The excuses that are offered for them are largely not real and wouldn't excuse their behaviour if they were. We are at a point where the moral judgments we make of other people, the duty we have to speak against them, to persuade them out of this, are now online. In a way that they weren't and wouldn't be in a more stable liberal democratic system. We have reached a point where all of us now have a responsibility to try and prevent the worst outcomes, and to directly hold responsible those pulling us towards them. I think that's how we should interpret that question. Are we at that point? And yes, we are. I think the gendered frame through which we often look at this, again, through our language and often largely subconsciously, distorts and perverts this moral responsibility. What I've called the gendered sense of moral responsibility in politics is bullshit, for the same reason it's bullshit in the personal sense. There are some forms of harm to others, be it beating your partner or inciting pogroms against your neighbours based on false, racist claims that they're eating pets, or demanding that they be rounded up and put in camps. There are some forms of harm to others that are just not justifiable and that we should hold people accountable for, and for which feeling or being disrespected or disadvantaged do not and cannot excuse. And I don't think that's what this is about. I don't think it's about disrespect or disadvantage. There is an open sadism about the Trump movement, a glee in harming others, a joy in their fear that is barbaric and unreasoning and nihilistic. In a very real and literal sense, they want us all to die. So, I think we have a responsibility to do what we can here. And I think that responsibility is collective. At a very basic level, I think we have a responsibility to vote against it. I've been very clear, consistent on that one. More than that, do what you can here. There's an election coming up. I've talked about confronting those most responsible, but, honestly, the biggest thing you can do to swing an election is register to vote and vote yourself, and then, of your friends and family who you know will vote the right way, are they all registered and are they going to vote? Right? Each and every one of us can probably round up 2 or 3 more votes, right? Then beyond that, yes, I think we are now at that point where more comprehensive moral responsibilities come online. I think there is a responsibility, if people are drifting down the right-wing online rabbit hole, to call that out. If people are saying racist or sexist or homophobic things, to try and talk them round. And I don't have a perfect model for how to do that. That will depend on the person, that will depend on your relationship with them. But again, I think that responsibility is collective. I think if we all do it, it lessens the burden. And, let's try and do it equitably. In calling out racism and sexism and homophobia, that might be a bit easier for me as a white man. I'm not as harmed by those things, perhaps. I have more standing with racists and sexists to call them out. So I should take the lead, right? But I think we all have it. I'd like to see that responsibility imposed in a way that is sensitive to those sort of things and in a way that is equitable, but ultimately we all need to be adding our voices to this, and it will just be so much more effective if we do. People often say, oh, it's you calling it out that's causing the problem. Shaming people doesn't work. People say this on the left too. Oh, vote shaming doesn't work. That's exactly what works. That's the only thing that works, right? the difference, I know this one quite well, between why a lot of leftists sat it out, Bernie or bust, voted Jill Stein in 2016, but forced themselves into it even though they had misgivings and voted in 2020, was not because Biden was their ideal candidate. It was not because they felt inspired. It wasn't even because they felt afraid. If I'm being honest, it's because a lot more people like myself who have small online platforms, people I think interpersonally just had less tolerance. I think there was a view that if you want to be an ally to whatever it is, you need to do this. And we're going to kind of hold you accountable for not. Not in any legal sense, but we are going to judge you. And I think that works. And I think same with racists. I think what really works is just that people's lives are going to get a bit worse if they're racist. That's what works. You can say, oh, shaming people doesn't work. That is the thing that works, but that only works if we all pull together on this. How can people still be supporting Trump? Honestly, at this point, there isn't an excuse anymore. We could maybe have kidded ourselves about it in 2016, but now people are opting into something that is violent and violently racist. And yeah, we need to do and say what we can here. I focused on the American case, but that is not the only one. I talked about the UK race riots. You could talk about many events throughout Europe. Now, the American election is a big one. That is a decision point that really, really, really does matter. But we're likely to be in what you could call a heightened state of moral responsibility for some time. I think many people resist that because they just don't want to be. And hey, I feel that. I don't want to be here either. But we are. I think one of the reasons, not the only one, but one, we engage in these obfuscatory, gendered moral frameworks in the personal case, is we don't want to admit that there's something wrong. If male predation and abuse of women is as common, as unprovoked, as unreasoning as you say, then that would suggest that there's something wrong broader than a few bad apples. That there's something wrong with men, with people, with relationships, with all sorts of things. Similarly, if the MAGA movement, and those like it, really believe in what they say, if they really will enact it if given a chance, if even the most basic liberal rights are in real danger, then something is deeply wrong in our society. Not just a few bad elites, not even the system. It's people, it's institutions, it's belief systems. All of us are failing in profound ways. I've compared it to not wanting to go to the doctor to get checked out, precisely because, deep down, you know something is wrong. If you're still on the other side of that, if you haven't made it through the veil of obfuscation yet, if some part of you in the back of your mind is saying, but I don't want to feel like I have a gun to my head, or that a truck is hurtling towards me, I can promise you it does feel better on the other side. I'm not dismissing the reluctance totally. Although I do think it's self-deceiving, I also get it. That lump in the sensitive area that kind of hurts, and you don't want to see a doctor about it because you know, deep down, that it's bad news. You're not crazy or cowardly for not wanting to get a diagnosis, for feeling like you're not ready for that conversation, because nobody is ready for that conversation. But I promise you, once you have it, you will prove equal to it. and whatever is to come, you won't regret having it. The regret, if it is there, will be in not having it sooner. It is the same thing with absorbing, not just tentatively but fully, our current political circumstance. I can say this both for myself, also I think for the people I know who started one way but have come through to the other side after various personal journeys. There is a relief, a sense of peace, a sense of groundedness, to being able to look at the world as it really is. To not have to obfuscate with other people or with yourself anymore. For all that being on our side can be frightening and often incredibly frustrating, I don't know a single one of us who would want to go back. Thank you for listening.